Imagine standing at the edge of a road, waiting for the traffic light to turn green. You're in a rush. The more you wait, the more restless you get. But what if I told you that this red light was saving your life? What if moving too soon meant missing what's meant for you? We've all been there. We pray, we plan, we push forward, only to be met with silence, obstacles, or closed doors. And in those moments, doubt creeps in. Why is this taking so long? Did God forget about me? But what if the delay isn't rejection? What if it's divine alignment? Today, let's talk about patience. Not just any patience, but patience in God's perfect timing. Because sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not when we push harder, but when we wait with purpose. Why do we struggle with waiting? Why does patience feel like a test we didn't sign up for? Because deep down, we fear losing control. Think about it. From the moment we wake up, we plan, we set alarms, schedule meetings, and map out our lives like a carefully structured blueprint. We convince ourselves that the sooner we act, the faster we'll arrive. That if we hustle harder, push stronger, and take matters into our own hands, we'll get what we want when we want it. And yet, life doesn't work that way. A job opportunity slips through our fingers. A relationship we thought would last forever falls apart. A prayer we've whispered 1,000 times seems to go unanswered. We watch others move forward while we feel stuck. And in those moments, doubt whispers in our ears, maybe God forgot about me. But did he? See, we live in a world obsessed with speed, faster internet, instant gratification, same-day shipping. We've been conditioned to believe that waiting is wasted time, that if something isn't happening now, it must not be happening at all. But faith, true, unshakable faith, asks something different of us. It asks us to trust, not just in God's plan, but in His timing. And that's where the real challenge begins. Because trusting His timing means letting go of ours. It means surrendering our own schedules, our own deadlines, and our own expectations. It means believing that just because we don't see movement doesn't mean nothing is happening. That just because we don't have the answer doesn't mean He isn't working behind the scenes. It's uncomfortable, it's frustrating, and yet when we look back at our lives, how many times can we say, I'm so glad things didn't happen when I wanted them to? Maybe the opportunity you missed wasn't rejection, it was redirection. Maybe that relationship falling apart wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something better. Maybe the delay isn't a punishment, it's preparation. And maybe, just maybe, what feels like a setback is really divine alignment in disguise. We love control, we crave it. We make plans, set goals, and chase dreams with the belief that if we work hard enough, plan carefully enough, and execute perfectly, life will unfold exactly the way we envision. It gives us a sense of security, a belief that we are the authors of our own destiny. But then life happens. The job we were counting on falls through. The relationship we poured everything into unravels. The doors we were certain would open remain firmly shut. And suddenly that sense of control we clung to so tightly slips through our fingers like sand. And what do? We panic, we scramble, we try to force outcomes, pushing harder and faster, believing that if we just do more, try more, hustle more, we can fix it. We convince ourselves that the more control we have, the safer we are. But control is an illusion. Because if we really had control, wouldn't everything in our lives have gone exactly as we planned? Wouldn't every prayer be answered on our timeline? Wouldn't every opportunity, every relationship, every dream unfold exactly when and how we wanted it to? But it doesn't. And that's because we were never meant to be in control. See, the more we hold on, the more we resist. And the more we resist, the more exhausted we become. Because we're fighting a battle we were never meant to fight, trying to take the pen out of God's hands and write our own story. But what if surrender wasn't about giving up? What if surrender was about freedom? Because when we surrender, we don't lose power, we step into a greater one. We stop striving and start trusting. We stop forcing and start flowing. We stop running ahead of God and start walking with Him. And that's when everything begins to change. Life moves in seasons. There are seasons of growth where everything seems to be flourishing. Opportunities fall into place, prayers are answered quickly, and we feel unstoppable. Then there are seasons of waiting, silent, still, uncertain. The doors don't open, the answers don't come, and no matter how hard we try, nothing seems to move forward. And these seasons of waiting, they test us the most. Because we live in a culture that glorifies speed, we're told that if we're not moving forward, we're falling behind. We measure success by how quickly we can achieve, how fast we can build, how soon we can arrive. Delays feel like detours. Waiting feels like wasted time. But nature doesn't work that way. A seed doesn't turn into a tree overnight. It spends time buried in the dark, unseen and unnoticed, as its roots push deep into the soil. It takes seasons before the first sprout even breaks the surface. And even then, growth happens slowly, steadily, always according to the rhythm of nature, never rushed, never forced. So why do we expect our lives to be any different? We pray for open doors, for new opportunities, for breakthroughs. But what if the delay isn't a denial? What if it's protection? What if it's preparation? What if God isn't saying no, but rather, not yet, I'm making you ready? Because growth isn't just about what we receive, it's about who we become. Think about the times in your life when you wanted something so badly, only to realize later that you weren't ready for it. The job you thought was perfect, but would have crushed you under pressure. The relationship you believed was meant to last, but would have pulled you away from your purpose. The door you begged to open, but would have led you in the wrong direction. Sometimes the delay is God's way of strengthening your roots before He allows you to grow. And in those seasons of waiting, we have a choice. We can resist it, fight against it, complain about it, try to force things to happen on our timeline. Or we can lean into it, trust that something is happening beneath the surface, even when we can't see it. Because just like in nature, nothing that grows fast lasts long, and the strongest, most unshakable things take time. It's easy to have faith when everything is going according to plan, when the prayers are answered quickly, when the path ahead is clear, when life unfolds just as we hoped. In those moments, faith feels natural, almost effortless. But what happens when things slow down? What happens when the answers don't come? When the door stays closed? When every step forward feels like it's met with resistance? That's when faith is tested. Not in the moments of certainty, but in the seasons of silence. And silence is uncomfortable because we equate silence with absence. When we pray and don't hear a response, we assume God isn't listening. When we take steps of faith and don't see progress, we assume nothing is happening. When we wait longer than we expected, we start questioning, did I hear God wrong? Am I being punished? Did He forget about me? But faith, true faith, is believing even when there is no evidence. Think about the story of Abraham. God gave him a promise, descendants as numerous as the stars, and yet years passed and nothing happened. Decades went by and still no child. The waiting must have been agonizing. The doubts must have been overwhelming. And at some point, he and Sarah took matters into their own hands, believing maybe they had to help God fulfill His promise. How often do we do the same thing? We pray for direction, but when things take longer than expected, we start forcing doors open ourselves. We ask for guidance, but when the path isn't immediately clear, we take shortcuts just to feel like we're making progress. We claim to trust God, but when waiting stretches longer than we anticipated, our faith wavers. But here's the truth. If faith crumbles in the waiting, it wasn't faith, it was convenience. Because real faith isn't tested in the moments when things are easy. It's tested in the moments when we have every reason to doubt. When nothing makes sense. When the waiting feels endless. When we can't see the finish line. And that's where the refining happens. Because waiting isn't just about patience. It's about transformation. It's about learning to trust beyond what we see. It's about strengthening our faith so that it isn't dependent on circumstances, but anchored in something deeper. And maybe that's the point of the waiting. Not to punish us, not to hold us back, but to prepare us for something greater than we could have imagined. When we pray, we expect an answer. And deep down, we hope that answer comes quickly. We want to see progress, movement, results. And when it doesn't happen on our timeline, frustration sets in because we equate delays with rejection. We assume that if the door doesn't open immediately, it's locked forever. That if the opportunity doesn't come when we expect it, it's gone for good. That if we don't see movement, then nothing is happening at all. And in those moments of waiting, doubt creeps in. Maybe God isn't listening. Maybe I misunderstood his plan. Maybe this was never meant for me. But what if the delay isn't a no? What if it's a not yet? See, we see time differently than God does. We live in the now, in the immediate, in the temporary. But God sees the bigger picture. He sees what we cannot. And sometimes the very thing we're praying for isn't being withheld. It's simply being prepared. Think about Joseph. He had a dream, a vision of greatness, of leadership, of purpose. But what happened next? He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison for years. If anyone had a reason to believe he had been forgotten, it was Joseph. If anyone had a reason to assume God's promises had failed, it was him. But God's delay wasn't denial. It was positioning, it was preparation. Because when the time was right, when Joseph had grown, when the circumstances had aligned, when the purpose was ready, he stepped into the very thing God had promised him all along. And had it happened sooner, he wouldn't have been ready. The people wouldn't have been ready. The moment. How often do we mistake preparation for punishment? We assume that waiting means God is holding out on us, when in reality, he's setting things up for something greater than we could imagine. Because receiving something too soon can be just as damaging as not receiving it at all. A fruit picked before it's ripe is bitter. A foundation laid before it's ready will crumble under pressure. A door opened at the wrong time can lead to disaster. And God, in his wisdom, withholds not to harm us, but to help us. Because when he finally does open the door, when the promise is fulfilled, when the breakthrough comes, when the season shifts, it will be at the perfect moment. Not just for us, but for everything connected to us. And that's the difference between our timing and God's timing. Waiting feels passive. When we're in a season of delay, it's easy to believe we're stuck, that life is on hold, that we're just passing time until the real journey begins. We tell ourselves, once this happens, then I'll move forward. Once I get that opportunity, then I'll be ready. Once God answers my prayer, then I'll start living with purpose. But waiting was never meant to be wasted time. See, we tend to focus on the destination, but God focuses on the journey. We want to arrive, but he wants to prepare. And more often than not, the waiting season is just as important, if not more important, than the season of receiving. Because what we do in the waiting determines who we become when the answer finally comes. Think about David. God anointed him as king when he was still a shepherd. The promise was there, the calling was clear, but he didn't step into the throne immediately. Instead, he went back to the fields. He kept tending sheep. He kept showing up in the mundane. He kept preparing, even when it looked like nothing was happening. And in that waiting, he developed the strength, the character, and the faith he would need when the time came to lead a nation. What if he had refused to tend the sheep? What if he had said, I'm supposed to be king, I shouldn't have to do this anymore? What if he had spent his waiting season bitter, impatient, or resentful? Would he have been ready when the moment finally arrived? See, waiting isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing the right things. It's about preparation, growth, strengthening what needs to be strengthened, learning what needs to be learned. Because the delay isn't just about the timing of the opportunity, It's about the readiness of the person. So what are you doing while you wait? Are you using this time to deepen your faith, to develop new skills, to build the foundation for what's coming next? Or are you sitting back waiting for life to begin only when circumstances change? Because here's the truth. The version of you standing in the waiting is not the version of you that will step into the promise. There's a transformation that needs to take place first. A growth that can only happen in the waiting. And that means the waiting isn't in the way, it is the way. Waiting is never easy. It challenges our patience, tests our faith, and forces us to confront the limits of our control. But if we look back at our lives, we'll see that some of the greatest blessings didn't come when we wanted them to. They came when we were ready for them. Because God's timing is never rushed, yet it's never late. Every delay has a purpose. Every closed door is either protection or preparation. And every waiting season is an opportunity not to be stagnant, but to grow, to trust, and to become the person who can handle the very thing we're praying for. So instead of fighting the waiting, embrace it. Instead of doubting the delays, trust them. Instead of seeing this season as a setback, see it as a setup for something greater than you could have planned for yourself. Because when God moves, when the door finally opens, when the promise is fulfilled, when the waiting turns into receiving, it will be clear, it will be undeniable, it will be perfect. Not on your timeline, but on His.